Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to our TGIF and Product Owner episode, this week with Gregory Miller. Hey Greg, welcome back.
Hey Vasco, happy Friday. Almost
Absolutely.
the weekend.
Happy Friday, everybody. It's almost weekend. And because it's almost weekend, let's talk about fun topics like the product owner role.
Yes.
We'll talk about a great product owner in a minute. But for now, share with us what might have been potentially the worst product owner and the pattern you've witnessed in your career.
Oh, yeah. Obviously, no names mentioned. I'm sorry for this person, but good person. This was a good person, I think, at heart. So what happens a lot of times at companies, in my experience, has been that when they switch over from a waterfall to Scrum, usually, right, they know they need a product owner. So for some reason, I've seen a lot of companies take project managers and make them product owners. And this person in particular had very little training. This is what I was told. He had very little training, went through it quickly, and it was a while ago. So maybe he would say to me a few times, I don't remember it a lot. So a very green product owner, right? Just with a very new team. So excuse me. In the beginning, I thought it was going to go great because he had been he was like a super SME. He knew even like a super user. He knew the product inside and out. I think that's why he was chosen, because he knew it so well. But the bad part is he knew it too well. He actually was doing the work. And when I took over, he was doing the work. He was, signing stories to himself, in the weeds, a ton of meetings, in the code with the developers, which at first glance, if you don't know much, you might be, oh, that's a really good product owner, right? Well, if you know what a product owner should do, you say, no, he's way too much. So, and on top of that, he kind of had an attitude. We clashed. My successes with him would be, you mentioned earlier, day to day. Sometimes I thought I had a win on Monday, and the next day it's in the toilet. And I'm like, what? It's just, he would sometimes berate people in stand up. I'd have developers calling me saying, this guy's got to stop. I can't take him anymore. He and I would get into it on the phone calls, clash. He would just, he would get on people's nerves. And the thing about him is he would say to me, I know I'm hard to work with. And I would, okay, if you know you're hard to work with, why? So I'm working with this guy who just was trying to understand Scrum. I think he didn't really like it. He knew he had to do it. He knew it was the future. Waterfall was going away, which it did. He knew he had to get on board, but he didn't really want to. It was kind of one of those situations. So I would meet with him multiple times. Even got to the point where I had a call with him and his manager and my manager to address issues, and it went well. Of course, he said he's going to change, but
so we start to see the pattern here. As you said, he didn't really want it. Knowing this now, Greg, what do you wish you would have done back then?
Probably the same thing I said earlier, is that he worked he worked downtown Cincinnati. I worked a little bit north, a lot north. So we didn't really meet that much in person. We did a few times. I think I'm going to go back to that. Is we may have gone on to lunch a couple times. I went out with him socially once, maybe. But where I'm going with this is I think I would have, again, tried to form that relationship and maybe tried to understand why he didn't want to do it. There was a fear under there. I mean, he had a job. He's been there for 20 years. He was a PO. He wasn't going anywhere. He wasn't going to lose his job. there was some fear. I think that's resistance to change. I believe that there's some underlying fear somewhere. I would have tried to understand what's making him tick, why the resistance here to this. You know, outside of putting Agile aside, trying to understand what's making him tick, his motivation, right? Everything on the outside seemed like he was secure and should have gone along with this, but he didn't. So I would have tried to delve in more to that. It's just that there was,
no matter how it looks at first, it's
Mhm.
always a people problem.
Correct. It is. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the most difficult part. Those are being some of my bigger failures.
And it's also the hardest part to crack,
Yeah.
the hardest not to crack. It's like,
It
it's
is.
easy to figure out the process. It's easy to figure out the facilitation rules, but
Mhm.
figuring out how to work with people, man, that's tough.
No kidding. Yes, sir. So that was my, and I left just to end that. I got moved on from that team, so I never was able to see where that went. I think he's still on that team, my understanding, the product owner, but there's been a couple new Scrum Masters assigned to that team since me. So maybe they've had better luck. I don't know.
How to Win Friends and Influence People. That's
There
a
you
book
go.
I always come back to, because it isn't about our success individually. It's about how we connect to others and how others connect to us and how we can work together.
Yeah.
Because literally, like in the space of software development and knowledge work in general, but software development in particular, it is brains connecting that creates value, right? It's not people typing on the keyboard that creates value. It's brains connecting. The typing on the keyboard is the visible part, but it's not really the most important part.
Correct.
But of course, there are also great examples of product owners, which is what we're going to explore next, Greg. So share with us the best product owner you've ever worked with. How did they work?
So the opposite. It's back. It goes back to my high performing team I mentioned earlier in the week. So I talked about a team that was high performing that crashed. That product owner was the best. And I still, again, the gold standard of product owners that in my head. So this woman, what made her so great was many things. She would come over meaning she was in a different building or different floor. She would come over with us maybe 2 days a week and sit right next to, like, a few seats down from me. So she was very accessible there. She was very accessible overall. That was key, even when she wasn't there. What made her great was, counter to the other gentleman I mentioned, she knew the project really well. She had been actually one of our customers. So a customer was our internal customer. This was in healthcare. So it was like a nurse or something in the field. So she actually used the product we were developing. So that was awesome. So now she came in and was the product owner. Again, this is where the other one went wrong, was the guy I knew so much. But this woman, it went well, because so we would do user reviews with the users. We had a UI UX person on the team, and I would sit on some of those calls as a Scrum Master because I wanted to learn the product and help them with their stories. So we would talk to users in the field, and they would give us their, help us feedback on design of the user experience and things like that, and requirements. And we would take that back to the product owner, and she would say, that's not what they want. And we were like, what do you mean? That's what they told us. She's like, they think they want this, but they don't really want this. What they want is this. And she wouldn't leave it at that. She would say, this is why they want this, because of such and such, and they think this is going to help them, but this, what I'm saying, is really going to help them even better. Right. So it's not just going to be like, at first I thought, oh, she just wants her way. No, she doesn't just want her way. She's really trying to help them better. And she would explain it to us, and I think she would even talk to them sometimes and explain why. She would be in every sprint review, and this was one of the better sprint reviews I'd ever been in. We did this every time. So since it was heavy UI, we would go in and we would do our pre-sprint planning with the team and say, okay, who's going to, like, introduce this story. The team members did that. So we would sit down, we would log into the site, and we would just give her the mouse. She's in the room with us. Here's the mouse. Okay, the first story, you're going to go and do this. And she would scroll around and be like, okay, oh, this is a new function. So you're seeing it right there on the screen. And she's giving us live feedback. And we had stakeholders, users on the call too. And we're going through it. And she's like, oh yeah, that's great. And she's clicking on it. And it was one of the best sprint reviews every 2 weeks that I've ever been a part of. She was just a really nice person. She would go out to lunch with us. She felt like a part of the team, right? And I mentioned she was only there maybe a couple of days a week, but she was in sprint reviews. She'd go to lunch with us. She was in retros with us, plannings and daily stand-ups. Again, it's coming back to that, it was her personality. She was very, she didn't always have to be right. She took feedback from the team. She just fit in with the team very well. And it was just a great experience. And I haven't had one that good since. I've had some I have a pretty good one right now, a really good one, who's similar to that. But I look to that one as probably the best.
Absolutely. And this is why we talk about these stories here on the podcast, because they are so inspiring. And we can, for example, why not just pick this episode and send it to someone and say, hey, take a look at this. Here's a few examples of what a great and not so great product owner would do. What do you think, right? Like conversation starters.
Correct. Yes, sir.
Greg, It's been a pleasure. We're getting close to the end, though. But before we do share with us, where can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
Oh, yeah. So you can go to, if Vasco found me, I do, in addition to being a Scrum Master, I do have my own podcast. It's called The Agile Within with Mark Metz, where we take a look at more of the values, behaviors, mindset of Agile. It's called The Agile Within. You can find it on any of the podcast apps here. I'm trying to learn from Vasco how to be a great podcast host. And we do have a Twitter account, The Agile Within. You can find me personally on LinkedIn, Gregory Miller, or we also have the Agile Within feed on LinkedIn. And I think that's about it. Yeah, that should cover it.
And we'll definitely put the link on the show notes so that people can go and find out the Agile Within podcast with Mark Metze, who's been a guest previously, and of course, Gregory Miller. Greg, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This has been fun. Appreciate it.
One more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast is over, but there's a lot more we have to share. We have developed our own membership site where you find a community of active and engaged Scrum Masters. In this site, you get access to exclusive content and get to interact with us, your podcast hosts, as well as the best Scrum Masters in the world. So join us at scrummasterpodcast.com and keep this podcast free of advertising. See you next week for one more full week of Scrum Master tips and tricks. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.